The wild coast, responsible for the demise of many a ship. Its distinctive beauty belies its capacity to build some of the most fearsome seas found anywhere in the world. From calm, azure blue seas to life-threatening waves brought about by gale-force winds and powerful opposing currents. The Agulhas current sweeps down from the north in a 108-kilometre swathe, moving up to 12 kilometres an hour. An advantage to ships sailing south, which wish to avail themselves of this awesome energy to save time and fuel, but not always without cost. Of the many victims of this wild coast, perhaps the Waratah is the most famous, as it remains to this day a complete mystery as to how this ship, with 211 souls aboard, disappeared without trace on the 28th of July 1909. Built on the Clyde by eminent shipbuilders Barclay, Curle and Company for the Blue Anchor Line, the Waratah was to transport passengers between the United Kingdom and Australia via the Cape of Good Hope. This 9,000-ton ship was the epitome of luxury and boasted plush furnishings, potted palms, and concealed lighting. Completed in October 1908 and classified Plus 100A by Lloyd's of London, the Waratah left England on the 5th of November in the same year, under the command of Captain Josiah Ilbery, a man with 40 years sailing experience and Commodore of the Blue Anchor Line fleet. Her maiden voyage was seemingly uneventful, and Alice Katz, a 12-year-old passenger at the time, fondly remembered the captain and crew.
I know everybody was very, very happy on board. We were all very satisfied, and the stewards were very, very helpful in every form. They were wonderful.
The second inbound voyage of the Waratah, however, brought a number of misgivings to light concerning the ship's stability. Claude Sawyer, an engineer and experienced ocean traveller, decided to leave the ship in Durban due to recurring dreams of disaster and his own experience of the ship's tendency to roll too heavily. One of the influences that helped him make his decision to leave the ship remains in Durban to this day.
It's actually a legend, maybe an urban legend, but I think there's a lot of truth in it, that the woman who lived here many years ago came wandering up the driveway with a niece of hers, knocked on the doorway and said, could she please come in? And she said, I have a story about your avocado tree, and proceeded to tell us that it had been a group of seedlings brought out from Australia by a man called Claude Sawyer, who had subsequently, he was fortunate enough to get off the Waratah, which subsequently disappeared without trace. The avocado pips had been growing in little jars of water, which worried Sawyer because the water kept on spilling out. You know, he could tell that the jars were not level, and I suppose he could tell from a lot of other things too. But he obviously had the seedlings in the cabin with him because they came off the ship with him. And he subsequently stayed in Durban, I believe, and somehow or other, perhaps knew the original owners of this house, but he brought them some seedlings, and this is one of the trees here, and there's another one on the driveway.
Other passengers and crew had in fact already raised the question of stability. Unbeknown to many, though, serious differences had already arisen regarding the question of stability, shortly after the Waratah was delivered to her owners. Correspondence reveals heated exchanges between Wilhelm Lund and Sons, the owners, and Barclay Curle, the ship's builders. First officer of the Waratah, Charles Owen, expressed his concerns, as Sir Michael Edwards, his great-nephew, recalls.
The mine crew was uneasy about the stability of the ship, and at Durban he said to this passenger that there were storms ahead, the cargo was shifting, and he advised this man to go by train. I rather think this chap was not headed for England, but headed for Cape Town. And he went to Cape Town by train, and as the chap said to my grandparents, Charles Owen saved my life. He persuaded me to leave the ship.
On the 26th of July, the Waratah left Durban for Cape Town. The following day, at 0600 hours, she exchanged signals with the Clan MacIntyre off Port St. John's and sailed into the twilight world of legend. At first, when the Waratah became overdue in Cape Town, some assumed that she had experienced mechanical problems and would soon arrive. Other ships steaming on the same route reported no sightings of her. Concerns for her safety eventually led to a full-scale search involving warships, tugboats and privately sponsored vessels being dispatched to search for the ill-fated ocean liner. On the 15th of December, the lutein bell at Lloyd's of London tolled, signifying that the Waratah was finally posted as missing. Surviving relatives in Australia, however, refused to accept that the Waratah was missing without trace. In February 1910, the Wakefield was chartered to carry out a systematic search lasting 3 months. Brian Putt, grandson of the master of the Wakefield, still has the log of the search.
The majority of their time at sea was in appalling weather. There are mentions of heavy seas, ship labouring heavily in these seas, engine speed having to be reduced quite often because of this. A lookout was kept from the crow's nest during the day, the crow's nest being a barrel attached to cross trees on the foremast.
At the end of 3 months, what had their search revealed?
Unfortunately, nothing. There mention that they, in the log, that they'd steamed a little over 15,000 miles in total in this search, but no wreckage or anything was found at any of the islands they visited, and obviously it was unfortunately a fruitless search.
For the next 73 years, no one actively searched for the Waratah, as it slowly entrenched itself as one of the great maritime mysteries of the 20th century. Then, in 1983, Emlyn Brown mounted the first of his expeditions in an attempt to solve the enigma of the Waratah's disappearance. This first expedition in 1983 served as a form of apprenticeship for Brown. It taught him the essentials of project planning, and that searching for lost wrecks was like any other business, and had to be handled as such. His fiercest critic at the time was Peter Humphreys, a maritime historian who believed that the Waratah must have foundered south of East London. Based on Humphreys' theory, the first expedition searched the area in which Humphreys believed the Waratah would be found. For some time, Brown had been convinced that the sightings of Corporal Joe Conker on that fateful day held vital clues to the location of the Waratah. Those references placed the ship north of East London. Humphreys, on the other hand, believed Conker's story was a complete fabrication.
When she was last seen, she was doing approximately 13 to 13.5 knots. As I said before, the current there runs between 1 and 5. Taking a mean of 2 to 3, she would then be doing over the ground a speed of approximately 15 to 15.5 knots. She would not have hit the storm until at the earliest 4 o'clock, 4:30, at the latest about 6 o'clock that evening, by which time she could, at that speed, have been approximately abreast of the Great Fish River mouth, and that is roughly halfway between Port Elizabeth and East London. I have one theory. I think that she possibly had a slight engine fault, turned round to make for East London. It will be remembered what had happened to the Valdivia the year before, reversed his course and made for Port Elizabeth instead. He got inshore and I think he hit a rock and went down.
And I realized then in early 83 that we were not sitting at the same table. We were going off in different directions, and so I decided to follow my gut feeling.
As a consequence, in 1987, the next search was conducted north of East London, when 2 search grids were scanned off the Ngora River mouth. Only 1 wreck was found in the areas searched, and it lay some 11 kilometres off the coast, well within the line of sight of Conker's report of seeing a ship founder.
Conker never said he saw the Waratah disappear. He said he saw a ship with a black hull and coffee-coloured upper deck works roll over and sink. It was a very accurate description.
Despite the fact that a sonar image was obtained at the time, the resolution of the image was of poor quality. Confirming that a wreck existed, it could render no conclusive evidence. Efforts to obtain more concrete proof were dashed due to limited resources.
In summary, the 1987 survey was nothing more than a process of elimination.
During 1989, 2 expeditions were mounted. The first intended to use a video camera mounted on a tubular framework. This proved impractical in the fierce Agulhas current. Several attempts to lower the device to the seabed came to nothing, when the framework collapsed due to the strength of the current, and the mission was aborted. Despite this disappointment, later that year, Brown was back on site, this time convinced that he would be able to obtain images with a newly designed and built diving bell. On the first run, sightings of wreckage raised hopes of finally identifying the ship, but a power supply malfunction in the bell necessitated the return of the bell to the surface before anything conclusive could be obtained. Unable to repair the power supply, and with sea conditions quickly turning against him, once again the search was frustrated, and Brown had to wait until 1991 to resume his efforts. He did come away, though, with 1 tantalizing clue.
One thing I did notice on that expedition were the rivets holding the ship's plating together. So at the very least, I had come away from the 1989 expedition with an idea of the vintage of the wreck. So it was a small clue, but nevertheless enough to inspire me to continue.
The 1989 expedition was sponsored by a media group, who were offering a prize of a free ocean cruise to Mauritius to the person who placed an X closest to where the Waratah was expected to be found. This was to be on the popular liner Oceanos, which sank in August 1991, just 8 kilometres from where the Waratah was assumed to have gone down. 2 further attempts, in 1991 and 1996, provided no further clues to substantiate Brown's case. Then, in January 1997, in an effort to gain visual confirmation, he and a courageous band of trimix divers set off for the wild coast. Their mission would be to try and obtain an eyewitness report on the wreck he believed to be the Waratah. Given that this meant diving to a depth of some 120 meters in the infamous current, it was certainly a bold attempt.
Trimix diving does tend to push the envelope a little bit. There was risk of shark attack during the dive and also during the long 2-hour decompression. But although the bottom time in this particular dive wasn't very long, perhaps the risk was worth trying to identify this wreck as that of the Waratah. And one diver, Steve Minnie, surfaced and later went over some images of the Waratah, and he relayed to me what he had seen. And this was a particular feature on the wreck which he was convinced was that of the Waratah, and from his description, so was I.
In June 1999, Brown mounted what he said would be his final attempt to image the wreck, this time using a sophisticated towed side-scan sonar system. He also brought on board Dr. Peter Ramsey, a respected marine geologist as survey party chief.
This type of wreck, which is in very deep water off the Transkei coastline, the best way to actually conduct a survey is using a side-scan sonar. And we're very fortunate to have this Klein System 2000. It's one of the most advanced digital side-scan sonar systems in the world. And what it does is it actually produces almost an aerial photograph of the seafloor using sound technology. The resolution is brilliant, and you can make measurements of the objects that you survey. You can measure its exact length and breadth, and you can determine any features on the wreck using this system. It's a very, very high resolution system.
On return Cape Town, hours were spent comparing the images obtained with a scale model of the Waratah along with technical drawings in an attempt to overcome any doubts to the ship's true identity. Dr. Ian Wright of the Marine Geoscience Unit was confident that the evidence was mounting in favour of the wreck being the Waratah.
In my mind, there's no doubt that it is the Waratah. But having said that, I don't think there is one diagnostic feature yet that we've encountered that says it is the Waratah. There are a lot of features, including its overall dimensions, its configurations, you know, the stern, the double props, etc., that all add together to show that it is the Waratah. And you know, that in my mind will stay a question until we put something down in the way of a submersible and pull out something or get a very detailed shot of something of the Waratah.
The findings of the 1999 survey, despite not having produced any tangible evidence, now pointed strongly to the fact that the wreck was indeed the Waratah. From Brown's point of view, the next logical step was to dive on the Waratah and produce film footage to provide conclusive evidence. Given the dangers the Agulhas current raised, he was not in favour of using any vehicle that required tethering to the support vessel. It was at this point that he decided to bring in a submarine. The first week of 2001 was spent in Durban Harbour, mobilizing the Toto, a recovery vessel, and the Delta, a submersible which had been shipped from California for the express purpose of finally getting irrefutable proof of the wreck's identity. On the 7th of January, the Toto left Durban and steamed south to the wreck site. After 18 years of searching, Brown's quest to finally solve the mystery of the Waratah could possibly over in less than 5 minutes when the Delta would be on the wreck site.
It sure is.
It is not the Waratah.
They just called up and said that the vessel they're on is a transport ship and not the Waratah.
I just can't believe this.
This huge dark shape just loomed up and was unbelievable. But what was even more unbelievable was when I saw a tank. what I think is a World War I, World War II tank. And suddenly my heart sank, and I thought to myself, this surely can't be the Waratah. And then when I saw a lot of tires, truck tires, and even more tanks, this time upturned, I could see the actual tracks of these tanks. It was with absolute disbelief. I just simply don't understand it.
And I think they did their homework. It was the right size. Everything was right. It's just you don't ever know until you actually get on a wreck what it is. And this has happened to us many times, as I said. Sometimes it's for the better. You find something more interesting than you're looking for. Other times it's a disappointment like this one was.
It was a big, big surprise. But that's what exploration can sometimes be about. A big surprise. You can get there and find out that it's not what you think it is. And I had that belief for more than 18 years. So I'm a little shocked, and I'm somewhat sad.
Yeah, I enjoyed diving on the wreck, but you know, everybody was pretty devastated for Emlyn, who was finally having a dream come true by finding the Waratah, and turned out he didn't.
Well, for Carry On, I think I'm fairly well known for my resilience. Just carry on. It's got to be there somewhere. So I'm an explorer and I'm a researcher, and my job is to find that ship, and that's what I've got to do.
So this wreck was a red herring. I just didn't know it 14 years. I just never knew it. Only until I got down did I realize then that it was not the right wreck. But up until that time, all the evidence, be it circumstantial or not, pointed me in the right direction. It's an extraordinary event in my life to have found that a wreck so similar to that of the Waratah was in fact not.
In his efforts over the years, Brown has always relied on scientific support and expert opinion. In this case, the experts had been misled by the evidence.
I'm shocked that it isn't the Waratah. The dimensions matched exactly to the technical drawings of the Waratah, the dimensions that we measured off the side-scan sonar. The length and breadth were coincident with that of the Waratah, and there were a lot of common features, but one must also take cognizance of the fact that a lot of the vessels built during that time were built to a very similar blueprint. So it is fairly difficult to identify them conclusively, especially a vessel that's fairly old and been lying on the seafloor for a considerable period of time, and decay has set in.
At the end of the day, the only way of exploring that wreck in that current off this coastline, the Wild Coast, was with a submarine. There was no way of knowing prior to going down and getting visual confirmation. No way of knowing whatsoever.
Within a week of his setback, Brown was back at the Wild Coast, retesting some old evidence from a new angle.
So what I've done is I've reenacted the 1925 sighting from the air by taking the same flight path as the pilot took in 1925, and we redid the bearing of Edward Joe Conker, and where Edward Joe Conker estimates the wreck to be and the flight path that the pilot took in 1925, they two do seem to cross. So it is more than likely that the Waratah does exist. She's just closer inshore and in shallower water. Until the next search, in my second area of probability, the Waratah rests for a while longer.